Hi everyone. My name is Anjay Rastogi. Thank you so much for attending our special core kidney edition today on wildfires and is staying safe and healthy. And the purpose of this webinar today is to share some ways that you can deal with this crisis that's going on. And I hate to use the same word again, the unprecedented, the fires. So we have a whole bunch of specialists that will be sharing their own expertise. And we really hope that we got a whole bunch of questions in advance, so we'll be answering those. But if there are other questions, please do put them in the chat. So with that, just a disclaimer that this is only for your information. Anything that we share and mention, but don't make any changes to your care till you speak to your healthcare providers. And this is our circle of core. This is our brewing beans, our undergraduate crop at UCLA. I'm just going to go through this quick because we have a lot of stuff. And before we get into the presentation, it's quite interesting. Just about a week ago, this is what we had in Pasadena, our second participation in the annual Tournament of Roses Parade. So it was a huge success. And like I say, it's a start of our campaign to increase kidney health awareness. And thank you so much, everybody who actually participated. And with that, let's dive straight into our special edition today, the chat on wildfires, staying healthy and safe. So my co-host today is Dr. Michelle Huang. She is a nephrologist, a very good one. Our main base or practice is based out of South Bay, Torrance. And she has a lot of titles, as you can see over here. But she's also the Associate Director of the Core Kidney Program. So that's Dr. Michelle Huang. She'll be co-hosting. And I think probably the most important one is, which is actually not even mentioned, it's mentioned here, the Wellness Champion. So she's a Wellness Champion for the division and also the Core Kidney Program. So Dr. Huang, if you can come on the camera, then it's a real pleasure to have Dr. Bohr here today, an outstanding pulmonologist. Did 4 interviews today already on all the fires that's going on and how that's affecting our patients, but especially their lungs. So Dr. Bohr is going to be going over, and actually we'll go straight into the questions. There were supposed to be some slides, but Dr. Michelle Huang will be presenting some slides. But I want to also go over some of our other panelists. We have Dr. Sarkar, and a lot of you know her already. She's our transplant nephrologist. We have Dr. Al-Rashid. You probably remember her as well. She did an outstanding presentation on dental health. But today she's joining us as a wellness champion as well. And then we have Jim Cunningham, our resident psychologist. We have Christina, and we have a whole bunch of brewing beans, Rain, Shivali, Surabhi, and we also have Shima joining us, our dietitian. So with that, Michelle, do you want to jump into your slide deck, and then
Sure.
Dr. Bohr is going to answer some questions.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope everyone's staying safe. It is an honor to be here to discuss an issue that has become increasingly urgent, not only for the environment, but also for public health. I'll be talking about the devastating impact of California wildfires, specifically on patients suffering from chronic kidney disease. As many of you know, there are multiple wildfires raging across Los Angeles County. These fires have brought destruction to communities, displaced families, and also caused air quality to deteriorate. For individuals living with a chronic kidney disease, the effect of wildfire smoke can be particularly dangerous. CKD patients already have a compromised immune system, and exposure to wildfires with its fine particle and then toxic chemicals could exacerbate their condition, leading to complications. So in the next few minutes, I'll outline the wellness tips for CKD patients and what to include in your emergency kits, and then how we can prepare for this. So I'm sure Dr. Bohr will go over it too, but briefly, limit exposure to smoke and avoid spending time in outdoors in affected area. And if you must go outside, wear a well-fitting N95 mask And then when indoors, close all your windows and doors, and then use HEPA air field purifiers if it's possible. And also, I recommend monitoring air quality index possible, and then also have a very important thing, have an emergency kit ready. And also know your options. There are a lot of resources out there, nationwide resources, how to get medications urgently, and also local resources like housings and supplies and etc. And a patient with a chronic kidney disease, make sure that you have a copy of your current medications and dosage. And then also keep a 3-day food supply. And also keep important medical information, your insurance, and your phone numbers to your doctors. And also wear a medical bracelet if it's possible. And when a widespread emergency occurs, if you're home and uninjured, make sure that you stay home and then unless instructed by the emergency personnel. And also make sure that you have radio near you and also up to date with your news, and then stay tuned if any weather watches or any flames and in your area. And this is only for patient with a dialysis. It's very important that they know their options too. A lot of people using cycler, and during the natural disaster like wildfire right now, there might be effect in your water system and also electricity. And make sure that you know how to do your manual exchanges, and and double check with your DaVita or dialysis unit if you have any questions. And also home hemodialysis patients, and make sure that you visit your nearest dialysis center for treatment if you experience any power or water outage at your house or need to evacuate. And for patients with a transplant, make sure that you have enough medical medications in your original bottles. So you have 2 weeks extra. That's what recommended. But if you can have more, that's wonderful. And also pack key information like medication list, the transplant coordinator's phone number and doctor's number, and also insurance. And then several small water bottle will be really helpful, and hand sanitizers, mask and thermometer if you and then gloves. And then if you have to evacuate to shelter, make sure that you limit your exposure to infections, and wearing mask and then having hand sanitizer will be really helpful. And I know there was a few questions about pets, about recommendation for pets briefly. Avoid, leaving your pets outdoors, in particular at night, and then should be indoor and enclosed garage or house in a cage. And dogs or cats appear to be in respiratory distress, they should be taken to the animal hospitals immediately, because their symptoms might be different than what we experience. With that, let me see a stop share here. If you have any questions about the slides that I went over, I'm happy to answer.
So, Dr. Wang, just a couple of things. We also have a dietitian here, as well as Shima.
Yes.
But for the medications, I'd ask them I keep it in the wrong link. It should be drugs and medications. But you should know there is a webinar that we did a while ago, and I think all our patients should watch this. It's very important that you have a detailed list of all the medications that you take, not just an electronic copy, but also a hard copy, and keeping at least 2 weeks supply of the medications. Also, make sure that if you're a dialysis patient, you are in touch with your dialysis unit. And if you're not a dialysis patient, make sure that you know which clinic you can go to, just in case those clinics have been shut down, or they're not, the appointments are not available. So all the emergency contacts should be there. And also, you had mentioned a bracelet, right? A lot of patients
Yes.
sometimes might have bracelets as well. So with that, I think Dr. Bohr Dr. Bohr, do you want to just give a brief introduction, and then I think you have a whole list of questions that Dr. Michelle Huang has for you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Rastogi and Dr. Huang. It's been really nice to get this opportunity to talk with you all today about what is unfortunately top of mind for many of us this week. And I'd first like to, compliment Dr. Huang for doing a really nice job of this just general preparedness overview. There are things in there that I had neglected to think about telling my own patients, so that's fantastic. Um, as Dr. Rastogi said, I'm one of the pulmonologists or lung specialists here at UCLA, and I principally specialize in asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD, which are both conditions that are very sensitive to air pollution. So this is something that's very familiar to the patients that I take care of, and hopefully some of the things that I've told them and shared with media today on some interviews will be helpful to all of you as well. Um, there are a lot of really great questions that were submitted in advance. And so I think the first thing that I'll do is maybe just give a little bit of an overview over why wildfire smoke is so harmful. And then from there, kind of get into what can we do about it and how do we best protect ourselves. And these are things that are going to be true for everyone, but particularly true for people with chronic medical conditions. And while the patients that I take care of with lung disease are even more sensitive to this, folks living with chronic kidney problems or on immune suppression certainly are folks that we worry about as well with exposure to pollution. So hopefully this will be helpful. And as Dr. Rastogi just mentioned as well, any additional questions that come up as we're talking today, please put them in the Q&A box, and then we'll get those answered for you as we go. So when plant matter in particular burns, and this is true of tobacco, and that's why cigarettes are harmful, but now we're seeing big swaths of wildland and brush and forest burn. The biggest thing that happens when plants burn is that you see ash formation. We all see that all the time, but even smaller than that ash, we get these really tiny particles that float around in the air. And some of those are so small that those can deposit as we breathe in all the way at the very end of the lung where the blood and the air touch one another. We call those the alveoli or the air sacs of the lungs. And so this isn't something that's just up in your throat, although we all feel this. And you'll even hear that I'm a little congested today because the air quality has been so bad here. But it'll get all the way down into the depths of the lung. And once it gets down that far, it's actually a lot harder for our body to clear it out as well. Because while the only organ that's smarter than the lung is the kidney, the lungs are pretty smart. And they have their own cleaning system, which work like a little conveyor belt to trap dust and particles and things and mucus, and then carry that mucus up with this little conveyor belt so we can get rid of it. Because unlike the kidney, that's the only organ in our body that contacts the environment around us 24 hours a day. And so it has to be prepared and able to clean itself like that in order to eliminate viruses and dust and pollen and whatever we run into. When these really small particles, and you may hear them talked about on the weather report as PM 2.5, and that just means a particulate matter of less than 2.5 micrometers in diameter, so really, really tiny. PM 2.5 is the most dangerous thing. And those particles are so small, like I said, they get all the way to the end of the lung. They can actually even traverse the lung and get into the bloodstream a little bit. When that happens, that causes a lot of inflammation, and it causes inflammation first in the lung itself. And that's why you'll notice if you are inhaling a lot of wildfire smoke or air pollution in general, that you'll be coughing a little bit more. You'll have more mucus production than normal. You may feel a little chest tightness or wheezing. But then on top of that, that inflammation can work its way into the cardiovascular system as well. And there's even an increased incidence of heart attacks related to a lot of wildfire exposure or this air pollution exposure. We see during times of year when we have big wildfires that the incidence of heart attacks and other cardiovascular disease goes up as well. And certainly folks that live with chronic kidney disease often also have a lot of cardiovascular disease because that's often what caused the kidney disease in the first place. So, for people that live with lung disease, their body is already overreactive to inflammation in the lungs, and that can cause a sudden worsening of chest tightness and wheezing. And we call that an exacerbation. And those exacerbations can be very dangerous because if the inflammation gets bad enough, we have a hard time getting oxygen through that inflammation into the blood where we need it. And we can have a hard time getting the exhaust from our metabolism, the carbon dioxide that we breathe out, back out of our body. those two things together can be really hard on the rest of our organs and can cause acute kidney damage on top of chronic kidney disease, for one. But it can cause confusion and difficulty concentrating, fatigue, chest pains, all sorts of problems. And so, all of that taken together, we really want to minimize our exposure to this type of air pollution whenever we can. And the best way to do that, which has come up a lot in the questions, is something as simple as staying inside as much as you can with your doors and windows closed. Now, we also recognize that that's not always a reality. People still may need to go to work. They may need to go to the store to buy food. You may be like me and have two very anxious dogs that need to go outside and go for a walk. And if you need to leave your home, what we recommend doing is if it's going to be more than about 5 minutes of exposure, 10 minutes at the most, that you wear a tightly fitted N95 or higher kind of equivalent mask. And this isn't the time to bust out those cloth masks that we were using during COVID because the pores between the fibers and the fabric are so big that the dust will go through it, the particles, the small particles. But a well-fitted KN95 or N95, like we would have used during COVID, or a P100 mask, which is more used for like painting and things like that. Those are things that can do a really nice job of protecting your lungs from exposure as you spend more time outdoors. One positive thing is if you have a newer car, like more than, the last 25 years, so after the year 2000 or so, most cars have really well suited cabin air filters. And so once you're in your car, that air is getting filtered as it's coming in from the environment. So while you may smell a little bit of smoke still, the big particles and things that are causing the biggest problems are being filtered out. So you don't necessarily need to wear it while you're driving, but getting to and from your car would be a good idea. When you're in your home, we recommend keeping your doors and windows closed. And if you have central air conditioning or a central furnace, most times you'll see that there's an air intake. And I know in my house, it's a big rectangular vent that's, about 2.5 feet by 1.5 feet in size, and it's really easily identifiable because it's going to be near the top of your house, and it's going to be near where the thermostat is usually. And you can get an air filter cartridge or filter replaceable filters that fit into whatever size that is. So mine, for example, is a 20 by 30-inch filter. Any hardware store or Amazon or big box retailer like Target or something is going to carry different sizes of those filters. And what I recommend to my patients with sensitive lungs is that you get the highest rated filter, and they use something called a MERV, MERV rating, and you want 13 or higher on that. That's going to give you the fine particle filtration, and that you change those filters at least every quarter. So the best time to do it, when spring, winter, summer, fall are happening, the day that the season changes, you just change your filter. And that keeping those filters nice and new helps filter things out. And what I've been doing the last couple of days is I just run the fan on our air conditioner all day. So that means it's circulating the air through that filter, even though I don't necessarily have the heat turned on. It's just circulating the air through the house. And then as you hear me being congested, I have really bad seasonal allergies. So on top of that, I have a high efficiency HEPA filter, HEPA, in our bedroom, and I run that all night long as well because you're going to spend most of your time in one room when you're sleeping. So those HEPA filters, there are a number of brands available. They're all fairly equivalent. It's actually the filter itself that makes the difference, not the machine so much. But Consumer Reports or the New York Times Wirecutter product rating has a really nice detail on which ones they think are the best value for their money. I personally use one from a brand called Coway, Coway, because it's pretty quiet, and it is powerful enough to purify the air in a standard size bedroom without being very loud. And so that's important to me because I'm trying to sleep through it. But honestly, what you want to look at if you're thinking about purchasing one is, can it filter the air in a room the size that you're going to put it in? And those specifications will be on the packaging as far as what is it rated for. Is it rated for a 400 square foot room or a 1,000 square foot room or something like that? Because if it's too small, then you're not going to be able to filter the air fast enough to make a big difference. And so those are probably the biggest things that I would recommend for folks to try to keep themselves healthy and safe. And I'm going to pause for a second in case there are any questions about that before I move on to some of the more specific questions, especially about transplant and medication interactions, which I think are really important to talk about too.
That's awesome. Any questions or any comments actually for that matter? So just a quick thing about indoors and outdoors, Dr. Bo. You
Yeah,
you mentioned the outdoor and I was reading that some of them can be worse than many cigarettes that you smoke in a
yeah,
day. So that our patients with kidney disease, diabetic, you mentioned cardiovascular disease, they have that. Um, so any um, zone or area that
yeah.
is so many miles out, it probably would, even if they want to leave this neighborhood, because a lot of people might just leave
Yeah.
and come back.
And I think that's very reasonable. I have a couple of friends who are pregnant, and pregnant people are much more sensitive to air pollution because the particles can actually deposit in the placenta that just left town because they felt it was safer for them.
Mhm,
Um, if you look on any weather app locally, or you can Google like air quality in my
mhm,
area, they air quality usually is rated in something called an air quality index or AQI. And that does a really good job of giving you an idea of how hazardous the air is in your kind of immediate area. A standard like summer day in LA when it's a little hazy out, that's going to be about a 60 to a 70. Anything under 100, I don't worry about very much for anybody. 100 to 150, what I usually say is if you have sensitive lungs or you have sensitivity from chronic health conditions, it's not a great idea to spend a lot of time outdoors doing strenuous exercise without a mask on. And most people can't really exercise well wearing an N95. It's just like it's too claustrophobic to do that. Um, Anything over about 250 is dangerous for everyone. And so that's not the time to go out and take a hike in the mountains to see if you can get a good picture of the fire, even if you're an athlete. Um, Anything above 300 to 400 is dangerous. And that's when like definitely stay indoors. If you are somebody who is very sensitive and has the capability to take a few days out of town or get to a different part of the city, like getting to the beach is usually a little better, then by all means, you can consider doing that as well. But the air quality index is a very reliable measure. And one of the nice things about living in Los Angeles is the EPA has monitors all over the city. So you're getting pretty good markers of your local neighborhood within a couple of miles because there are several hundred air quality monitors throughout Los Angeles. Now, if you're living in a more rural area, I grew up in a farm town in Oregon, I would have been getting the air quality from 20 miles away. So that may not be as useful if you live in a more rural area. You can certainly get an air quality monitor for your own home. There's a company called Purple that makes them, and they're about $150. And if you're somebody that really wants that information, certainly that's a reasonable thing to think about doing as well. Um, but those are all things that I look at. And once the air quality gets below 100 persistently, you probably don't need to worry about going outside. And even under 150 for shorter bursts or, maybe slightly longer periods of time, still wearing an N95 if you need to be out for longer periods of time. And I think what we can anticipate here in Los Angeles is that, the fires are likely to continue burning through the middle of next week, even with the best efforts. And, we're really hopeful that with the wind shifting, that will get better. But even still, the smoke is going to linger probably until the end of next week or beginning of the week following, like 4 or 5 days after the fires are extinguished. And if you've been here during the 4th of July, you realize that, how bad it is after the fireworks every year. You can kind of use that as
yeah.
a frame of reference.
Talking about Oregon, we actually have somebody from Oregon who's in the audience, Mr. Andy Bennett. So he always joins from there.
Oh,
Great.
nice.
Thank you. Dr. Wang, any more questions? Still, Dr. moves on?
No, I think he covered it. It was really useful. I was just kind
Yeah.
of put my notes down right here. So
Yeah.
like what kind of air purifier and co-way and everything. So it's very helpful. Thank
This
you.
is getting recorded, so you don't have to take notes, Dr. Wang.
Okay, thank you.
Rastogi, I've got
Um,
Dr. Rastogi,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes. Hi. Hi, Sonu.
Hi.
So Sonu is one of our kidney transplant recipients and patient advocate. Yes, Sonu.
awesome.
And I do have a secondary amyloid in my lungs,
Mhm.
and I'm a transplant recipient too. So my question would be like, if I have to end up taking more albuterol for
Yeah.
some reason, then how do I adjust my tacrolimus dosage?
That's a great question. That was one that I saw in advance and I was actually about to get to. So I'm glad you asked that. It's a great transition. And I'll circle back to a couple of the questions in the chat as well. I just looked this up and thankfully there is no drug interaction between albuterol and tacrolimus or mycophenolate. So you shouldn't have to worry substantially about any interactions with your dosing from albuterol. And so for people that do use an albuterol inhaler, and for people that have chronic lung diseases like asthma or COPD, you're very familiar with those. But even in the short term, if you're having a lot of chest congestion related to the air pollution and you get in touch with your doctor, it's very reasonable to try an albuterol inhaler for a short period of time, even if you're not somebody who has chronic lung disease, because all those really do is they take the air tubes, which get narrowed kind of like this, when they get irritated, and they open them up bigger, which makes the air flow in and out more easily and makes wheezing and cough a little easier. So it is real. I'm glad to be able to tell you that there's not a significant drug interaction, nor if somebody gets bronchitis to the point of needing steroids like prednisone, there are not significant interactions with the other drugs. But you should talk with your nephrologist about what to do after that short course of a higher burst with getting back to your previous dose if you're somebody that takes prednisone long term for transplant, because we want to make sure we do that in a way that's thoughtful and safe to make sure that there are not big shifts in your dosing. And so
Yes.
that's true for anyone. Um, did that answer your question, Sonu?
Yes, yes. And
Perfect.
I have another question. If I am taking, I do take 5 milligrams of prednisone every day. And if I have to add like flucortisone or something like that, so does that increase my chances of infections and things like that, or what should I do about that?
From a lung perspective, not really. Doses that are lower than about 20 milligrams a day generally are not things we worry about opportunistic lung infections by any means. So that's a great question. Um, and the air pollution itself is thankfully not carrying a lot of pathogens in it, but it can be quite irritating. And so, um, getting back to the thing that I just was getting to with using more medications, if somebody needs a course of prednisone, it's really because the dust and the particles are um, causing inflammation, and the prednisone's helping calm down that inflammation more than anything else.
Okay.
Um, the other thing that someone had mentioned that came up in a written question was whether or not exposure to the pollutants themselves could interact with your immune suppression dosing. And as far as I can find, there's not a lot of good information on this. But no, it doesn't look like that this air pollution does anything with drug metabolism to the degree where you need to be worried about changing immune suppression dosing either. That's the same advice I give to my lung transplant patients, who I personally don't do lung transplants, but when I see them, certainly talk with your doctor if you have specifically any concerns about changing dosing, but generally, no, shouldn't be worried about that either.
Thank you so much.
Of
Was that,
course.
and Dr. Wang, there's some questions coming in chat. Do you want to ask those questions
I have a
too?
question.
Yeah, go ahead, JC.
Um, Dr. Bohr, or I hope I didn't butcher that too
Yeah,
bad.
no, that's great. Perfect. 10 out of 10.
So I'm a psychologist, and so I'm dealing with a lot of trauma over the fires, obviously. And my general consensus, I guess, I err on the side of caution. And when I talk about self-care and things people can do so they don't feel so victimized by everything that's going on, I have suggested that they basically stay inside just because maybe in the next couple of days, it's legitimate to say, go out and wear N95 masks or do this or that. But I've just felt that it's probably safer to err on the side of caution than not. So do you have any thoughts? Or I guess my real question is, what do you think over the next, and nobody has a crystal ball and they can't predict what other fires break out, but the trajectory of something like this, how does it dissipate? I guess is my question.
Yeah, and I'll caveat that I'm not an environmental scientist or a meteorologist by any means, but from my experience from living in Southern California for 20 years and in the Pacific Northwest before that, the best thing that would happen is we get a good rainstorm, and that would both wash the pollution out of the air and help with fire suppression. It doesn't seem like that's something we're going to see. So, I think the really Herculean work that's being done by the fire suppression crews and, the tanker pilots and all these people putting out the fires will go out either when they run out of fuel or the weather becomes such that they don't propagate and they burn out the fuel they have. From there, LA basin is shaped like a bowl, and so uh, the Santa Ana winds are actually, it's funny because were we not having a fire, the air quality after the Santa Anas come through is actually usually a better because they blow all of the stuff in the air out to sea. Though while they're blowing in dust and pollen and irritants from the desert. So like my patients with asthma complain often, as do I with my nasal allergies, that during the Santa Anas, the air quality is awful. But you'll probably also notice if you live here that the day after they die down, you can see, the mountains a lot more clearly. So what we really need to happen is we need the smoke to dissipate, and then we need the weather patterns to change in a way that it blows the smoke, out of the area. And we don't need crazy wind to do that, but it's going to take 5 to 7 days most likely for that to clear up. At least that's what it usually seems like. And in the meantime, I agree with you. If you are somebody, especially if it's going to make you more anxious to go outside, then don't do it unless you really need to. It's completely fine to take some time off of work for your own health, especially if you have chronic medical issues. And your doctors are more than likely going to be happy to write you a doctor's note if you need one, and say better safe than sorry for you to not expose yourself. Um, it's just balancing out what you need for yourself, both for your mental health and your physical health.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. All right.
Can I ask a couple of questions that's on the
Yeah.
chat?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious myself too. Is ash particle larger than asbestos?
I was going to Google that because I saw that question and I didn't get fast enough. So, asbestos is usually about 0.1 to 10 microns in size. And the particles we're talking about are about 2.5 microns in size. So they're kind of in that in between range. And so asbestos, that's a great question, actually, because asbestos can dig its way into the lung and cause future problems. The cumulative wildfire smoke exposure is something we worry about too, not just the acute for a couple of days being sick, but repeated exposure for days and days at a time. We are seeing and expect that we'll see an increased incidence of chronic lung disease in people that live in wildfire exposed areas. And that's like maybe one of the reasons we're seeing an increased rate in emphysema and COPD, which has traditionally been a smoking related lung disease, even though cigarette use has really fallen by a significant amount in the US in the last 20 or so years.
I think, Dr. Bo, this question came actually from Christina, and I think one of the reasons why she asked that is are we getting more exposed to asbestos, especially these old houses are going up in flames?
Yeah, asbestos is not vaporized very well. As far as the biggest risk from asbestos is when it gets disturbed. So I think, and this maybe relates well to the question that it looks like Andy asked as well about suburban and urban fires compared to wildfires. So one of the big issues, if you're close to a fire that's burning and it's a structure fire, is that you're getting additional exposures to chemical compounds beyond what we see in wildfire smoke. And so wildfires, burning trees and brush and things like that, is still harmful because of all the particulate matter, but um, chemicals in building materials can be a significant concern as well. I would be most concerned for someone, for example, if you had a short evacuation window and there is a fire burning immediately in your neighborhood while you were trying to get out and you were delayed. So let's say you had 5 or 10 minutes of significant smoke exposure, or if you were trapped in your home. And we see this actually in home fire victims when we admit them to the ICU, is that lumber, for example, is treated with chemicals to make it more water resistant. And when those are burned, they can produce some cyanide gas, for example. And then materials in plastics and things in the home, when they burn, produce a lot of carbon monoxide. And so there is a risk that you'd be exposed to significantly more harmful chemicals if you're in close proximity to an actively burning structure fire. I don't worry about that for us living here in LA. If you are like me and I live in Culver City, the closest fire is about 8 miles away, because the volume of air that dilutes it is so significant that the concentration's not going to be high enough by the time it floats down here to be an issue. And the same would be true of asbestos that got broken up from, demolition or building from falling down from the fire, et cetera. If you're right there with it, then the concentration may be high enough to cause problems versus folks that are farther away. So not something I'd worry about for the general population, but if you were in the Palisades and your house itself was on fire and maybe you didn't evacuate right away or you were held up, if you experience dizziness, lightheadedness, chest pain, headaches, difficulty concentrating, difficulty catching your breath after close proximity exposure, that's a go to the emergency room level problem because of those chemical exposures that we worry about.
That's a good point, and I think I was going to bring that up. If you are symptomatic, get help.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
and I think Andy brought up another good point. The kind of, we call them wildfires, but they could be in the rural, they could be in suburban, urban, or so. I think when people are Googling this information, they should keep that in context as well.
Absolutely.
So I know Dr. El Rashid is turned our camera on. Dr. El Rashid, do you have a comment, a question, or?
I actually have a question. I was about to turn my mic on.
Yeah.
Are there any supplements that we can take? I know for kidney patients, maybe there are some more limitations because of the medications, but I think everybody would benefit from a way how to clear our body because out of these chemicals.
Yeah, there's nothing that I've seen that's well validated in studies as being super useful. I will say that some of my patients with chronic cough from chronic mucus production from lung disease take a supplement called N-acetylcysteine, which I know the doctors on the call will recognize as a drug called Mucomyst, and it helps thin out mucus, and it is available as an oral supplement. Some of my patients swear by it. The literature on how well it works at a population level is technically that it doesn't make a huge difference. But it's really well tolerated and it's not significantly harmful for kidney health or liver health or anything like that. I don't know if there are any interactions with any transplant medications, having not looked that up in advance, but definitely something that one could consider if you're having ongoing difficulty with chest congestion. But other than that, I think just taking your regularly scheduled medications is important. And if you have persistent chest symptoms after the fires die down, get your primary doctor or your nephrologist to get you a referral to see one of us if it's lasting more than a week or two, because it could be that we just uncovered some mild pre-existing lung disease that has now become more obvious, and that may need specific treatment with inhalers or things like that too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I just follow up on that?
Please do.
Okay. So I come from like a more of an integrative outlook on patient care and healthcare and self-care actually. So maybe making sure that when this tough time, as we all know, it is very hard and it is trying, but to try to eat a healthier diet if available. I always say get the best food you can afford or you have access to, just because of the antioxidant. Like, you were getting attacked with all these things, our bodies,
Yeah.
and we just want to try to help our bodies be strong enough to uh, be well and healthy.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely correct. And there have not been great specific diet studies on specific foods, for example, for lung health that are necessarily helpful. But just like you just said, maintaining a healthy diet in general that's, principally plant-based and full of antioxidants and things is definitely going to be very helpful. And, hydration helps keep mucus thin, for example. So that's a good thing to keep in mind as much as you're able to do given the restrictions from your kidney disease, um, eating antioxidant food, being mindful that a lot of things are high in antioxidants or high in potassium as well. So just being mindful of those things, I think that's all really wise, regardless of what the scientific studies say. That's like just a great idea in general as I sit here and sip my lavender and peppermint tea, because that is something that calms me down and soothes me when I'm stressed out. And this has been a very stressful week, I think, for all of us, especially that 4 o'clock in the morning fake evacuation notice that a lot of us got last night. So,
But there was a comment about your hair tips too, Dr. Bo, and on mine as well.
I, I think, unfortunately, Dr. Rastogi and I got different genetics, and I'm going to attribute most of this uh, to that. But I'm far less wise than he is, so I think he made out
just
better
the
than I
opposite.
did in a lot of ways too.
Just the opposite. But Dr. Bohr, I think Dr. Rashid brought up a good point, and we have Jim over here as well. That healthy living, right? You shared such valuable information. All of this is being recorded, so we're going to push it out. But overall, like you said, take care of yourself, eat well, hydrate yourself, mental health. I know Dr. El Rashid is very high in meditation and mindfulness. Please keep on doing this, because the stress doesn't end with the fires going away. This is a long haul. I mean,
Yeah.
this is going to be years and years, if not longer, that will be recovering from all the damage that has been done.
Yeah,
So
I
I think,
completely agree with that. And I actually have studied to some degree kind of social stress and support in lung health, and that's one of my areas of interest. And this is going to be a really challenging time for a lot of people. And I know I personally know at least a dozen people have lost their homes. And while I'm fortunate it wasn't myself, it's still really hard on a lot of people around. And so make sure you all take the time to take care of yourselves as much as you can. And that stress, if it's not addressed, does cause more inflammation, and that causes more problems in the long run. So we want
yeah.
to make sure that we're paying attention to that for sure.
And there's another question came in from about the neti pot.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that?
I irrigated my sinuses about an hour before this call because I was so congested that I sounded like Joan Rivers. It wasn't great. I personally hate it because I feel like I'm being waterboarded, but it does definitely help.
Uh,
So the most important thing with this is make sure if you're using a neti pot, number one is always use distilled water, or if you don't have access to distilled water, boil a tea kettle of water on your stove and let it cool down to room temperature, and use that water. And while municipal tap water in general is pretty clean, if you're going to shoot water up your nose into your sinuses, you want to make sure it's sterile, because there are bacteria and little amoebas and things that survive the water treatment process. And the second thing is it will be a lot more comfortable for you if you use the little saline packets that come with the sinus rinse kits. Or you can look up the recipe online and use kosher salt. That's completely fine. If you don't want to buy the more expensive packets, that's completely okay. But there's a ratio that I don't have memorized of kosher salt to distilled water that's effectively the same thing. So
yeah,
that's completely fine too. But yeah, it's great. I mean, I hate it, but it is very useful.
yeah, yeah. And I think just to reinforce the point, Dr. Bohr, that you made about the water being clean or saline and stuff, with a direct connection with your brain. The
Yeah.
infection can go straight from your nose
Yeah,
to the
there
brain.
definitely been a couple there's been a couple cases of like a brain-eating amoeba that people got from using well water to do neti pots with. So we don't want that for anyone.
Right. And for the particulate size, there's also the ash versus microplastics. I think that came up.
For anything that can get into your bloodstream, which is a big concern with microplastics, it needs to be smaller than about 1 to 2 microns in size. And so, I think roughly speaking, you're looking at things that are around the same size, but not, I can't give you an exact measure for that. No. I saw the additional question about nebulizers.
Yeah.
Nebulizers versus inhalers, they work equally well from a medication efficacy standpoint, but some people find a nebulizer much easier to use than an inhaler, especially if they're having symptoms. And so, if you're somebody who already uses albuterol as a rescue medicine, for example, it is very reasonable to ask your physician to order you a nebulizer and the nebulizer solution as well. There's most of the compressed air nebulizers are basically exactly the same. There is a brand called Pari, P-A-R-I, that most of my patients use because it works a little faster than some of the other ones. But that's the only significant advantage, is that the air compressor is a little more powerful, so you can get the medication nebulized more quickly. And for my lung patients who take 3 or 4 treatments a day, that's important for them because otherwise it just takes more time. But otherwise, they're all equally effective.
And Dr. Poor, are there any links or resources that patients can go to if they have any questions? I mean, you can put in the chat or you can email it to us, and we'll share that with everybody.
Let me look up. We have some on the UCLA Health website for our division. There are some patient resources actually.
That would be wonderful. And Dr. Wang, don't we have a lot of resources on UCLA in general for our? I mean, you're working in the wellness campaign, right?
Yes.
Aren't they putting a lot of? Can you put those as well?
Sure. I'll put it in. There is a lot of helpful information on the UCLA website too. I think it's thanks to Dr. Boer's division. I think a lot of pulmonary doctors are putting out recommendations. And people who have, I think there is a question about COPD, people have CKD and also COPD, and what they have to do, and they have to take more medications. So those are all, I think, in the UCLA website, so I can put it there.
Yeah, I put in a link to our COPD specific program, which has a lot of general resources, and I'm going to put the one for the asthma program in as well.
Wonderful.
Dr. Rastogi?
Yep.
As a patient who has been using Neti-Pot for a while, I think I recommend that a lot. Personally, it has helped me a lot. And the second thing that has really helped me for my breathing is chanting. So, which is almost like yoga and pranayama.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wonderful. Chanting is good.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, and it is not invasive.
Yeah.
And you're not putting any drugs in or anything.
Yeah.
And for the Neti-Pot, what I have figured out is if you put it at an angle, it does not go directly into the brain. So I was worried about that infection part too. And for that, I figured out that if you put it at an angle, when you squirt the water at an angle, it doesn't go in there. So the direction of the bottle is important.
Yeah, we have to be careful because it still has to go up because it has to come to the other side.
Yes.
So I'll still be very careful about that. So
yeah,
because the angle probably not going to make too much of a difference if it still has to, but it might. But thank you so much, Sonu. Or you still had some questions, right, that you had to answer, or
the last one that I think last two that I wanted to get at was what to do if wearing a respirator makes it harder to breathe. And that's a challenge. I think that's a challenge for everyone. And I think I wish I had a good answer aside from listen to your body and take your time, because the only way that they work well is if they're thick enough for them to filter out the air. Now, when we were doing COVID, they do make N95 masks that have what's called an exhalation valve on them, and it makes it easier to get the air back out at the end. During COVID, when we were worried about spreading viruses, we said don't use that kind. If you're doing, like, let's say you're going to paint your house and you're working by yourself, or you're going on a walk by yourself outside, I don't really care if you exhale through the exhalation valve, because we're not worrying about spreading a virus. You're worried about keeping paint fumes or smoke out of your lungs. So the exhalation valve ones, perfectly reasonable for protecting yourself from wildfire smoke. Not a great thing if you have a viral infection, you're worried about spreading it to someone else. It won't do the job. But otherwise, take your time. And the other thing is some fit better than others. Like I have kind of a longer face, and so like the cup-shaped ones don't fit my face very well. But the ones that look like a duck bill fit me really well. And so some of it too is figuring out what fits your face correctly. And so that can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, but I think that's a good point. I know we learned that with COVID, the fitting is actually very important.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And yes, Dr. Bull.
And the last thing that people said is, what do you do about cleaning up after these accumulated pollutants? And I think, just plain wiping things down, and, if you're cleaning outside, just general hosing things off is fine. If you're going to stir up a lot of dust and particulate matter from ash and stuff that's settled, and you're sweeping and dusting and things, wear your mask when you do that. That'll at least make sure that while you're cleaning up, you're not inhaling that stuff and irritating your lungs further. Again, like we kind of alluded to earlier, if you're cleaning up from general dust accumulation or ash accumulation after, I don't worry about toxin accumulation very much. If you're doing demolition from a burned out house, that's a different story. And so I think being really mindful and careful, wearing goggles, wearing gloves, coveralls, and a well-fitted respirator is going to be really important. And that may be even if you're doing a lot of that work, getting kind of the Bane mask with the rubber fit around your face may be more practical if you're going to be doing a lot of that type of work. But I also wouldn't recommend that people that have chronic health problems be doing that type of demolition themselves, unless you really, really have to, and then being careful and taking lots of breaks, getting fresh air in between. I think that covered most of the things that I had specific answers for, but I want to be mindful of the time, because I know there are some questions as well that may come up still.
Yeah. Great. We also have Dr. Sarkar here, if she has any comments about transplant patients. I don't know. Oh, there she is.
No, hi. I mean, I think Dr. Beer and Dr. Wang actually covered it fully. I just would recommend that, LA County, sitting myself in a fire zone, I can tell you that LA County is pretty organized when it comes to, setting out alarms, sending out alerts. So it is advised, at least for transplant patients, go, your medications are on a day-to-day basis. Even when you're getting just an evacuation warning, kind of gather up those important things. It is advised that if you have to relocate, just send out a message to the transplant center to make sure if in case you need urgent medications, you have a pharmacy in mind in the center where you go to or the place you're going to. Do wear a mask, because I think somebody commented, this is both a wildfire and an urban fire. Things have burned, all kinds of things have burned. You will be exposed to locations where there may be crowding. The water may not be as clean. So wear your mask, be careful, try and avoid crowded situations if you can. And at the first sense that you don't feel well, reach out to your transplant doctors.
Yeah. And being proactive is so important. Just want to make a couple of comments about that, Nettie. So I think I get your point now, Sonu, that instead of shooting straight up, if you shoot at an angle, it's less likely to I think that's a good point. And there's a couple of comments about chanting. So Sonu, you'll send some links to us that people can start chanting. Great. Anything else, Dr. or Sonu? Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I have one of my friends who teaches chanting for free. so I can introduce people to her.
Oh, that'll be wonderful.
Great.
Thank
That'll
you.
be wonderful. No, thank you.
I do have one question that I do want to ask Dr. Beer. That came up for my patients, like what to do when they return to their homes that they evacuated due to fires.
Yeah. I think to some degree it's a case-by-case basis, but depending on how much smoke damage, how much fire damage, how much water damage, like let's say there is a fire suppression effort and there's water damage to the home. One of the things that I worry about, especially for our immunocompromised patients with transplants or with chronic lung disease, is mold exposure. And so if when you return to your home, if it was in a burn area and there's significant ongoing smoke odor, I would get it professionally inspected before I return to my house to make sure that it is safe to return. Now, going in and getting your things is one thing, everything we just said is the case, but before you move back in, you'll want to make sure that it's professionally inspected, that it's safe to return to. And, fire hoses and things can cause a lot of unseen water damage that then can result in mold later. And the mold can be really challenging. And for people with compromised immune systems, can be quite dangerous in the lung, even if your immune compromise is related to another organ transplant. So that's something to be mindful of as well. But the other thing is remember that if you did leave things like medications behind, it would be a good idea probably to get new prescriptions instead of trying to take the things that were either potentially heat exposed and may not work as well, or may have been smoke exposed or water exposed and may have become damaged. So those are also things that I recommend. And I think just like Dr. Sarkar was saying, I tell all of my patients, make sure you know what your medications are, make sure if you're evacuating, you take them with you. And if anything gets messed up at all, and actually just if you evacuate, period, let us know because we want to know that you're out of your usual environment and be prepared to help you. And if you end up needing to decamp to a shelter, it is still flu season. And so being mindful that, that the rate of respiratory virus transmission in close quarters is still substantial. And so being cautious and careful for your own health in that situation. Like a good friend of mine works for the public health department and was doing surveillance around the shelters in Pasadena because we're still in the middle of flu season to make sure that everyone was taken care of. So hopefully that's not the case for anyone. You don't end up in that situation. But if you do, don't hesitate to let your doctors or the transplant coordinators or whoever it may be know so that we can help you make the best decisions for your health.
And Dr. Bohr, we just did, Dr. Joanna Shainman from UCLA, Transplant ID, just did the triple-demic, COVID, flu, and RSV. So if we can put that in the chat as well, that'll be great.
Yeah, and if you haven't gotten your boosters or appropriate vaccinations, please don't hesitate to get those.
Great. Dr. Al-Rashid, do you have any comments or?
Yes, I do. I know it's the webinar is coming to an end, but I just want everybody to hold their own selves in compassion. It's so much that everybody's going through, and for our pool of patients, what they're suffering, it's even more. So it can be overwhelming. It is overwhelming. It is hard. So take a moment and let that sit in. And with being in the fire, I'm in the fire adjacent, so we're packed and ready to go anytime. But there is grief, there's guilt if you don't have to evacuate, grief for the people who did. And we're having all these emotions. Feel them. It is fine. Be grateful for whatever you have, no matter what happened. If you're there and the loved ones are there. I mean, I was telling my daughter, what do you pack in a bag? How do you put all your stuff in a bag? And no matter what you put in, it's not enough. But then you have you, and you're the one who are capable of making new memories in the future, hopefully. So just be mindful of that. Nothing lasts. The hard times don't last. So remember this. And just take care of yourself as much as you can. Some days are going to be harder than others. And breathe. Breathe indoors for now. Take a second to breathe. And then things will work out. and connect with the people that you love.
Dr. Boer is very happy when you said breathe.
Yes.
There's a big smile on his face.
Yes.
It is highly
We have-
recommended.
We have to, and then we have to take care of each other's, everybody, people on the panel, reach out to each other, people, patients, reach out to your people. So together we'll be okay.
And I just want to say, you said reach out to your people. One thing that we should all do is reach out to people who might need help, your patients, and just checking up on them, because sometimes you're so close that you give up your own care. So I think that's and that we have seen that a fair bit as well. So they get so lost that they don't take their medications, they don't go for their appointments, and they don't follow up on their own medical needs. So that's very important. So I think, Dr. Huang, any final thoughts?
No, I think this is really helpful. It was really helpful for
It was
myself
excellent.
too.
Yeah.
It was, thank you so much, Dr. Boer, doing the sixth, I don't know how many you did today. And
But
then
this was the best one.
this
was
the
the best one.
And then thank you for all this, amazing information that, we learned. Appreciate it.
Well, this was really excellent, Dr. Boer.
Yes.
I think this, and we'll be pushing it out in our social media. So we really appreciate that.
Yes.
And
Wow.
Thank you for the invitation. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy.
Yeah. And
Yes, and
Dr.
breathe. Yes.
Yes.
And we will continue to breathe. Okay, everyone. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Rashid, and Dr. Sarkar, JC, Christina, Arbeens, everybody. Thank you so much. And